Now, it's World Earth Day on Saturday. The world is overpopulated now with over 8 billion people consuming and abusing its natural resources. Climate change is a grave concern, and globally, countries have been trying to avert a catastrophe. Commitments to lowering emissions have been taking place, but are they enough? Can behavioral science also save us from mass extinction? I'm joined now by Dr Jako Volschenk, Senior Lecturer in Strategy and Sustainability at Stellenbosch Business School. Good afternoon, Jako. Welcome to today here on ENCA. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, there have been all sorts of measures and targets set, but the argument that's coming out now is that we have to change our behavior.
Absolutely, and that's a fact. I think for the last 30 years, we've seen the United Nations trying to make provision for the things that we need to do. As a world body, I think there's been lots of commitment from their side, but what's been lacking is agreement between countries. What we typically see is that countries like America, the US, the Middle East, even small islands, all have their own agendas, and it's also lobby groups behind them, from oil, from the beef industry, etc., that's been preventing countries from really reach a consensus about what needs to be done. So instead of waiting for governments to reach conclusions and recommendations about what should be done, I think it's much more apt for us to decide that we need to do this as humanity, but to make people change often needs some commitment to changes, and I think behavioral science can play a role.
And a lot of sacrifice. I mean, I understand from a statement I've seen about this before we interviewed you, is that the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is saying that 41% of the of climate change, the primary driver, 41% is the production of beef, and cattle milk is 20%. And we know, for instance, in South Africa, we love our nyama.
We absolutely do, and that's one of the challenges, is that we need to make a mind shift. You know, if you arrive at a braai, or you invite your in-laws to dinner and you do not serve them meat, it's frowned upon. So those are something that as a society we need to change. And often it's not the obvious things. It's not price, it's not taste, it's not people do not want to change. But we can make certain changes and make it easier for people. For instance, in restaurants, one of the things that we can do is, if we move a meal like a risotto, which is normally quite a nice meal, if you just move that from the vegetarian section into the main meal section, the orders of that meal goes up by double, by 100%.
Yeah, you remove that V symbol on the menu that says,
absolutely.
And you put it somewhere else. But I mean, on a very serious note, targeting lifestyles to talks to behavior would require a mindset shift. What are your thoughts about incentivizing people to actually gently be nudged from one extreme to the more useful one for our future?
Dan, there are a number of examples, and you know, even in South Africa, one of our biggest medical insurance companies is renowned for gamification, going to the gym. You get points for doing certain things. You make it fun for people. Even if those of you that have the language app on your phones, we are, you know, you've got a 50-day streak, and then you're afraid to lose the other one. So there's a number of ways for people to make it, or policy to be fun, to be easy, to be cheap. There's a number of certain things that we can do that make people change. Berlin, for instance, during the COVID time, they saw the Berliners moving away from public transport to cycling. So what the city did is they were very timely in the intervention by saying, if people now want to do this, let's create bicycle lanes. And people found out that it's very social to cycle. So they've seen a massive shift away from people using cars in Berlin to using bicycles. And they made it fun, they made it easy, they made it safe, all of these things. So there certainly are things that we do not have to give up our quality of life, our luxuries, for us to actually make a big contribution to climate change without us having to wait for international agreements.
Yeah, I mean, because for as long as demand is there for certain products like beef and cattle milk, the pressure will be on the agricultural land, for example, and our scarce water resources to provide that production. But it's easier said than done, Pro? Dr. Jako?
Absolutely. I think you've said so earlier. It is, we are a nation that eats a lot of meat, so it would require some mind shift. But I think the purpose of behavioral sciences is to convince people, and sometimes in ways that we do not even realize, that it's easy. We've seen companies making that, let's not waste a big crisis. We've had COVID where people saw we don't have to be in the same room for a meeting. We can meet by Zoom or Teams, etc. We can create other experiences for people that don't have to go to other countries for those. And yes, we do want people to be social. We want people to interact. But even as like the short left movement in South Africa has shown with tourism, there's plenty to do in our own country, and it's typically the rich that have the biggest environmental impact. In South Africa, with great inequality, it is to the richest parts of society that we can make that move away from meat, and it's not that difficult. And I suspect once we start doing that, we'll also see other segments in the market moving that movement with. The use of potatoes in Germany wasn't common until the king announced that these are my potatoes, you may not steal them.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what would work for us here in South Africa. But let's just look at the numbers, because I mean there were targets, as I said earlier, that were set. But I see the emissions gap report of 2022 has found that there has to be really drastic measures to cut emissions over the near and medium term in order for us to avoid a global catastrophe.
Yes, that's right. We need to cut by 43%, so it's almost by half. And again, if we take that in South Africa, at least, the population that's responsible for most of the emissions, it means that we will have to cut our emissions by more than that. So the way that we eat, the way that we travel, etc. But we really do not have much time. The IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, showed that it's the last report, or they proclaimed that it's the last report they will reference the changing climate of 1.5 degrees. They say after this report, that target is no longer feasible. So we're really looking at 2 degrees Celsius, and if we do not meet that one, we're starting to look at tipping points. We're looking at forests that would start dying, and if that happens, we lose the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide and at the same time release methanate in the atmosphere. So there's a runaway climate change that can potentially happen if we ever reach that stage. And beyond 2 degrees, it becomes unthinkable. We've seen major weather events in the past few years, and that's prone to become much more if this proceeds.
Yeah, and we in the media, I must say, are not doing enough of talking about this. And I thank you for your time this afternoon. I think we need to do more. I mean, you're talking about weather patterns that have become extreme. Just the other day, we had Cyclone Freddy, which lasted the longest. It's the longest lasting cyclone in terms of time and distance traveled all the way from the north, just north of Australia, and to our shores here in Southern Africa. So if you're looking for evidence of the impact of climate change, you have to look at that, and also what happened in KwaZulu-Natal in April last year. Thank you very much, Dr. Jako Volschenk, Senior Lecturer in Strategy and Sustainability at Stellenbosch Business School.